Hi guys, my name is Victoria Chaperone, and I researched the effects of low and high resistance training to determine the best results for muscle hypertrophy. Okay. So muscle hypertrophy, what is it? Oh my goodness. Hold on. What is it? It's an increase in muscle mass and cross-sectional area. The increase in dimension is due to increase in size and not length of the individual muscle fiber. So we'll go into that as we get further into the presentation. So basically what I looked into is, can training with higher loads adapt similar results as training with higher loads? So the reason I went into that is because I've been an athlete for about like 15 years, and I work at a gym and everything, and so you always hear, oh, you want to increase size, you want to increase power, you have to go heavy, you have to go heavy. So why continue to research this? To better understand exercise activity and to determine results and incorporate in sports to improve their performance. So is it just only heavy weights? Is that all? I don't think so. So that's why I went into and looked into it. Okay. So the actual question that I researched was, what are the effects of 6 weeks heavy resistance training at 85% 1 repetition max versus 6 weeks of light resistance training at 65% 1 repetition max on muscle hypertrophy? So the hypothesis that I came up with based around experience, I would say, and everything that you hear and all the controversies about weightlifting is heavy at 85% 1 repetition max will result in greater muscular hypertrophy than light 65% 1 repetition max, which makes sense. You want to be big, you want to get power. 85% seems bigger than 65%, so that's how I got my hypothesis. The dependent variable of this research was basically muscle hypertrophy. So which resistance training can get me that? And the independent variables is exercise, fitness, and endurance intensity. So again, this was to determine which resistance training will benefit athletes in power, endurance, and strength to better formulate exercise routine to better their game. Okay. The introduction. Muscle hypertrophy occurs primarily through chronic, anaerobic, and high-intensity resistance activity. So the changes are dependent on the type of activity and muscle fibers that are being used. So an example that I saw on one of the studies that I read are the bicep curl versus the squat. So basically, each one uses a different type of fiber to activate the specific muscle, such as the bicep curl, or such as the bicep and the vastus femoris. So studies have found that between loads being applied to the muscle, the intensity and duration of the type of contraction shows to increase in size. So basically muscle fibers that are recruited during activity contract slowly due to slow myosin ATP activity. And the high oxidative capacity of type 1 fibers contain many capillaries and mitochondria, so this allows them to have a slow rate of fatigue in the muscle, where the type 2 muscle fibers are best suited for both anaerobic and aerobic activities. Okay. So studies comparing muscular adaptation between light and high load exercise have generally shown greater increase in 1 repetition max for those training with heavier loads. However, according to the scientists, there are different recommendations to lifting heavy loads. While there is evidence that fatiguing contractions do in fact result in increase in the EMG activities, resulting from an increased contribution of higher threshold motor units recruited to maintain force output. So again, it only depends on force output, whether the light resistance or the high resistance. It all depends on the motor units maintaining that force output and the ATP. Since a fiber must be recruited to initiate adaptive response, it seems logical to conclude that training with heavier loads is necessary to maximize recruitment and therefore muscular adaptation. Seems logical. So the reason I decided to go with female collegiate or elite athletes is because of the main research for me was, can light weight really help out power, endurance, and intensity to better their game, pretty much. So I went with 20 female collegiate elite athletes with previous weightlifting experiences. Obviously, there was 2 groups, 10 on each group, 1 on the light group, 1 on the heavy group. And it all depended on pretty much the questionnaire that was there. So the main reason in studying collegiate athletes was because of their interest in the research and prior experience of being able to do the load and the work. Okay. Those receiving any lower care for musculoskeletal disorder, amputations, or heavy medication were excluded from the studies, and based around their power and strength, they were trained into 2 groups. So again, why athletes? The interest in their research, personal, both for the athlete and myself, because I was very interested in that to see how I can better my game, and then future study on how we can keep improving sports performance. The instruments that were used in this research was the t-test and the EMG. Okay. So statistical analysis. There are no differences in demographic data considering subjects were all female. So there was not like 1 male, 1 female, random people. They were all around the same age too. Like they vary anywhere from 20 to 27. So group X total reps, group times total reps times sex. So two groups, light and heavy, total reps that they all did, all 20 of them, were 20, and the sex was 1. Serving as evidence that though performing a single set exercise is in fact effective, gains are limited in degree. According to Schoenfeld, training with light or medium weight will, until muscle fatigue, would result in muscle hypertrophy. And those are in all of his studies that shows from 2010 to 2016 pretty much, because there's another 2016. So the results of a paired t-test reveal that light resistance training increased muscular hypertrophy significantly more than heavy resistance training. So the discussion is both peak and mean muscle activations were remarkably low in the difference from each other. Previous studies have found that greater activation of the quadricep and the hamstrings during the squat activity exercise until failure using a load roughly to 70%, 1 repetition max will benefit more than anything lower than that. Muscle hypertrophy is constant with recruiting as many motor units as possible, so for a sufficient length of time to achieve a muscle fatigueness. So basically, you have to be at 70% or more, doesn't matter the weight, and you have to recruit as many motor units to reach that muscle fatigue. Okay. Hypertrophic equality between protocols could be determined at least in parts to relatively greater in type 1 fiber muscles than training with lighter loads. Again, that's in one of the studies. And then mechanically induced tension produced both by force generation and stretch is considered to essentially grow the muscle. Some results that were found were, according to previous study data, light resistance training resulted in slightly more beneficial in muscle hypertrophy than heavy resistance training, which was kind of a surprise for me, but I think I expected it. The overall mean of light resistance was 4.7 and the heavy was 6.3. Though the means show that heavy load is higher, the EMG tests show otherwise. So the EMG activity was found during an HL set, and you can read all that compared to the LL set. So that's the EMG at least. And then according to the correlation data, light resistance training slightly overcome heavy resistance. The validity of the test determined that lightweight resistance increased muscle size and endurance because it showed to activate more muscle units and reach muscle fatigue longer than heavy resistance. And that was my research. Hopefully you guys kind of learned something and I didn't bore you to death. Thank you.